I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir. He's the Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Thank you, Jim.
How important are primary industries to Canada's economic health?
Well, we have new evidence from Stats Canada that they are fundamental, and they've measured incomes, and where we see rising incomes and shrinking incomes, static incomes across Canada, and they've done some work to shine a light on why it is that you have these disparities.
So where do we have the good incomes?
Well, guess what? For many listeners of your show who are aware of these issues, I think they won't be surprised to know that in Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, in the provinces where we have a healthy resource sector, you've also seen an increase in family household incomes over the last few years in places where they're saddled with manufacturing, like Ontario, which has really seen that as a drag on its economy because they haven't been that successful, or places like the Maritimes, New Brunswick, for example, where they've actually said, let's not develop our natural resource opportunities. Those are the places where it's flat or declining incomes, and that hurts those families.
Are those not areas that have rejected fracking?
Well, you got it. On New Brunswick, they have gone through a process, and I think the legislators have listened to some voices over others, and they've said, look, would rather import our natural gas from the U.S. Really what that means is exporting jobs. Would rather export Canadian jobs to the U.S., buy our gas from workers down there, because we don't want to be bothered with the challenges of developing our own energy sources. And when they do that, it's a decision that maybe they think wins them some green kudos, but really they're just sending the effects of resource activities, which are real and have to be managed, to other places.
Well, Eastern Canada also rejected the Energy East program that would have sent Western Canadian petro products to the East Coast for industrial production. Instead, they're using the Middle East as their source. Who is a safer, more reliable source?
Well, if you talk to people who've worked in there, and in the West, I've gotten to know quite a number of people who've had the job experience, life experience that's brought them to Central Asia, to the Middle East, to Venezuela. And the stories you hear from people in the oil and gas industry about what they've seen, the work practices, the safety, the environmental standards in other places, it's sickening, really, what other places do. So the idea that, and we hear this even from the Green Party in BC, if you can believe it, that it's somehow an act of environmental common sense to not extract our own resources for our own use within Canada. It really boggles the mind that the Green Party wants to export good Canadian jobs to Saudi Arabia, where women just got permission to drive, as if that's some sort of environmental statement. I think the average Canadian is repulsed by that, which is why a party like that remains very limited in its appeal.
So what can be done to promote primary industries, and are people's fears about them legit? Well,
I think we look around, we see that in a place like BC, we think of ourselves as a great big province with wilderness areas, and that's true. But when you look at the landscape in a more detailed way, you realize that more than 90%, almost 95% of the land area is mountainsides and places that are not that inviting to human habitation. And so we tend to live in the 5% of the province or 6% of the province, the valley bottoms, the river estuaries that are comfortable for the way that humans like to live. You know what? That's also where animals like to live and birds like to come. And so what we're doing with our human habitation is really pressuring a lot of the original habitats of wilderness. And we tend to, when we think about environmental pressures, I think we tend to think about things that other people are doing as the problem, not the things we're doing. And I think there needs to be a bit of a reckoning on that. You know, most of the environmental impacts are caused by the way we live, where we live. And we have to get better at managing our waste, our emissions, the amount and things that we consume, for sure. We're not perfect, but nevertheless, we do live in a world where in order to live the way that I think most Canadians accept, you have to have resources as inputs. You know, I'm talking to you today on my iPhone. I know that there's something like 35 mineral elements that are required to manufacture this phone. They have to come from somewhere.
The towns that do have mining, do they resent the fact that they're extracting minerals and it's bringing great wealth to them?
I rarely hear that complaint, Jim, and I think you know why, because your question is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, if I'm not wrong. You know, you talk to a town like Princeton, say, that used to have a strong mineral base. The mine went away, and then recently, you know, after years of lagging behind, they had a new mine come along and open up as a result of that. And I was just hearing from the mayor of the city talk about Princeton's experience. They've had young people moving back. They've had a tax base to be able to provide municipal services. And now that town is a happening place again. Do you think that anyone in Princeton doesn't want to mine there? Well, you'd be wrong. Same with a place like Kamloops. They've got a mine there. It's called the New Afton Mine. They mine gold and I think some other things. I've been up there. I've toured that mine. It's like being in a scientific laboratory. I mean, I'm telling you, these jobs are high tech. They are safe. The land, you look upon it, you can stand on some of the vistas there. It's beautiful to look at. And they have plans. You know, there is a tailings area there over the next 50 years as they go through the life of the mine. They'll be rehabilitating that habitat. It'll be just as good as it was before they had a mine there. And people at Kamloops just gave that mine an award for sustainability last week. It was in the news. Places like that where they have the mining, they understand it.
Do you think if they bring in proportional representation in BC, it'll change the public affairs or the public relations face of natural resource development?
Well, that's an interesting question. I can certainly see that. I mean, if we have a more fractioned legislature and it's less easy to make difficult but needed decisions, I think we could see those projects, the investments in communities, be challenged. You know, we're already seeing Canada increasingly regarded as a place where you don't want to invest your money because the regulatory processes are kind of like a banana republic. You know, just when you think there's certainty as to what the rules are, some politician steps in and says, no, you can't do that. I'm going to sue you. What the hell's going on? You know, I think there's a lot of confusion, whether it's in Asia, in London, the trading desks in New York and Chicago. People in those places are looking at Canada right now like we're a big joke.
Well, the private contractors and small business association would like to have a policy of once you say yes, you mean yes, because it seems every time some project's approved in BC, 10 minutes later it's taken away. And yet they've probably invested a lot, you know, like training people and so on.
Yeah, and these are choices we're making that won't have, you know, the kind of, you know, easy to see consequences that happen, you know, when things occur in the city. You know, if a new building doesn't get built, people can see that it's still a vacant lot. You know, if a high profile store closes its doors due to a lack of business, you can see that empty storefront and you can hear from those. But when in rural areas a project doesn't get built, you know, a mine can't move forward or a pipeline project that has been passed by the world's best energy regulator here in Canada, the National Energy Board, has approved it. The federal cabinet has approved it. You know, if that can't get built, the consequences will be hard to see to the naked eye, but they are real because it affects jobs where the resources are extracted and processed. It affects jobs along the way to manage the safe transportation. And, ultimately it affects jobs at the port side and shipping, the maritime sector, but not in a way that leaves a gaping empty storefront. In fact, much worse than that, because we're talking about billions of dollars in lost opportunity, not the millions of dollars from, the more visible businesses in the city.
Would the compressed natural gas industry be one of those perceived as being a banana republic and a loss of investment, LNG?
Well, yes. I mean, when you have a clear decision that has allowed investors to move forward and get to an FID, a final investment decision, and then suddenly you see a government adding new regulations or saying it's going to take just going to pluck a few more feathers because we know that's such a rich opportunity. Well, that's when investors turn on their heel and go. It's not considered polite or politic to make a lot of noise. Usually the announcements they make are very low key, very inoffensive language. But as you talk to the people on the inside of those companies, you realize the frustrations they have are genuine and legitimate, and they are rampant across our industries right now.
Can you estimate how many billions BC's lost out on because of a perceived anti-development attitude by the provincial government?
It's hard to specifically pin it. I mean, I would give the new government a bit of breathing room since they're new. So I wouldn't say the following cost is directly caused by that, but I think it's symptomatic of the general atmosphere that there's maybe $60 or $70 billion in lost opportunity for BC. And when you consider that, for every $1 billion, there's probably 1,000 new businesses that are created, to service those projects, be it the welders or the people bringing sandwiches. These are things that flow through the communities that are involved in projects, and when we don't have them, that's just a loss. That's how big it is.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after the break.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Glance Technologies owns and operates Glance Pay, a disruptive mobile payment technology now live in 16 cities in Canada and about to launch in the U.S. With revenues up 664% in the last quarter, Glance Technologies has the potential to be a worldwide leader in an industry projected to grow to $1.3 trillion in 3 years. Glance Technologies stock symbols are GLNFF in the U.S. and GET in Canada. Find out more at glancepay.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, the massive Site C hydro development in northeastern BC in the Peace River country, is this thing actually going to get built? They've spent 20% of the money on it already, but it's going to be studied once again. Is that just the NDP's way of saying no go?
Well, personally, I hope it does go ahead. That's a $9 billion investment in clean energy that will allow BC over the next 10, 20, and more years to transition to a lower carbon economy. We know we need to do that. Any responsible energy planner should be looking at this kind of project. I think what we've had is pressure from, some various interest groups who are interested in, their energy solutions being purchased by the province of BC rather than this investment by a major crown corporation. I think that's at the base of this issue. It's interest groups looking to get a slice of the pie, and they want in. Over the long term, I think that there will be room in the energy system for diversity of energy suppliers. But for this decision, we're going to see very soon, by November 1st, the BC Utilities Commission issue its final report on the fate of Site C.
Well, shouldn't they have done a report before this thing started?
Well, I think the number of reports done on this prior to a decision favoring the dam by the previous government's cabinet was voluminous. You know, the thing was studied to death. There was a federal provincial process. You know, the fact it didn't go to the Utilities Commission, I think some have made political hay of, but the provincial government was under no obligation to do that. They made a decision based on the information they had, and it, I think, is one that stands up to scrutiny. They needed to find a source of clean energy for the long term. They had one. It was a timely moment because of the downturn in the oil sands to procure contractors at an affordable price, and that's what they did.
Well, if we're not sure about Site C, what does that do for the businesses that were planning on being there and, again, probably hired people, trained people, acquired new equipment?
Well, I think they are in possession of contracts that probably allow them to have an orderly retreat from that work. You know, it nonetheless, for individuals who've moved their families to live in the area so they can work in this project, who've planned their next few years, you know, it's another 7 years of construction. So this is a time frame when individuals can be putting their kids through school and they have big life decisions. For a lot of those workers, it's going to leave them coming up with, you know, some alternatives, which is what happens in these cases. But I think they will see it as unfortunate. For the province overall, if it's the case that Site C is not needed and it's the wrong project and should be shut down, then it's what they need to do. But in these current circumstances, I think looking at the impact of not having Site C is maybe a way to understand better what's on the line. So I'd like to take you through a few of the consequences should the project be canceled.
Well, if 20% of it's been completed and they cancel it, how much is it going to cost to go and pile back all the dirt that's been removed and so on?
Well, probably there will be $3.3 billion in sunk costs in site remediation. And then there will be an additional $1.8 to $3.4 billion to create the same power in future from something else. So the cost of canceling the project is going to be somewhere in the range of $5 to $7 billion versus completing it at a total cost of $9 billion. Now, bear in mind that there could be cost overruns, very likely going to be cost overruns of maybe $3 billion at this point.
So, in other words, we dug a big hole in the ground, we filled it in, and we don't get anything out of it.
Yes, it's a bit like the fast ferries, but on a much larger scale.
Well, the fast ferries, if they would have made a few modifications, would have been perfectly viable. They seem to be working well where they are now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a totally fair comparison, you're right, because the Site C project is not a white elephant. It's sound in its engineering and its ability to serve the public over a very long period of time, whereas the fast ferries, had they been designed differently, maybe they would not have been sold off for pennies on the dollars for, I think, use as barges in other parts of the world.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Lotus Ventures Inc. is a BC-based medical marijuana company poised to launch into the rapidly evolving cannabis sector. Lotus is in the final review stage of the Health Canada approvals to become a licensed producer, having arranged facility financing of up to $12 million, plus building permits for its prototype indoor production facility. Shares trade under the symbol J on the Canadian Securities Exchange. Visit our website at lotusventures.ca.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're chatting with Stewart Muir. Stewart, You brought up an item, mining in an innovative supercluster, oil and gas excluded. Could you maybe explain that to me?
Well, the federal government, they have $950 million, let's call it $1 billion, they're going to distribute towards the creation of 5 innovation superclusters. Now, that's not something you get to eat in a tin box or at Christmas time that someone's brought to your house. This is a way they have to unify industry and government and academia, the research they do, to focus on a variety of different opportunities like clean resources, clean technology, digital transformation, manufacturing. The federal government is doing a process right now to identify a final list of 5 innovation superclusters that can help to advance Canada's competitiveness in the world. And one of those is in the area of mining, where we happen to be probably, together with Australia, Canada and Australia, one of the 2 leading countries globally in mining technology. It's not only something we do to develop our own resources, we export our knowledge and people around the world to help the rest of the world get at minerals in a safe, economic, and sustainable way.
Where is this place going to be, or do we know yet?
Well, it could be in Sudbury, which is really the mining capital of the country. They've had these deep mines there in hard rock for a very long time, and that's also where the Center for Excellence in Mining Innovation is located. So we do, however, in British Columbia have a significant stake in this. The University of British Columbia has a program that's participating in the Supercluster Initiative. So what they've done is get together with this cluster of other companies, universities, nonprofits to develop the idea. If they get money, they would probably get 1/5 share of that $1 billion, so a couple of $100 million to go into that area. Now, here's what's happened recently. We've had a longer list of companies and cluster initiatives brought forward. One of them that didn't make the cut was in the area of oil and gas. Now, based on the amount of innovation, research and development that is done in the oil and gas space in Canada, you'd think there would be an innovation supercluster proposal advancing, because there is so much research done. It is the subject, not just in Alberta where the industry is centered, but at places like UBC and all across the rest of the country. It's a place where there is a lot of resources available to do the science and the technology development to aid the identification, the prospecting, the extraction, processing of oil and gas.
One thing that maybe gets ignored by Ottawa is how much high tech is done in Vancouver and how that can help develop natural resources safely, sustainably as well. Do you think that we are underscored by the federal government?
Well, I think the federal government has some people who are very much aware of the amount of activity in Vancouver. If you start looking at the different companies that are active in developing technology and systems to advance the resource industries, it's actually, I would say, staggering. I've recently been doing a series at ResourceWorks. You can read it at resourceworks.com, our website. It's called Naturally Resourceful. We've profiled so far 7 companies that most people have probably never heard of that do advanced science and technology to serve their clients in the primary industries in Canada and abroad. And they have the best and brightest people. They have profitable businesses. They are hunkered down in areas of the Lower Mainland that you might not know they're there, but they very much are there. They have international businesses. And I think they've been kind of left out. You know, the excitement that the mayor of Vancouver has around Microsoft and Facebook, it's nice to see. But those companies, when they, send some jobs, tend not to be ones that produce a lot of GDP. They're not necessarily long-lasting. I don't want to criticize them, but the fact is, compared to the high-tech jobs associated with resources, it's a very different scale. You know, the resource technology is really one of the biggest drivers in our economy, and I think it needs to be recognized and appreciated more.
Well, we had the federal government with its recent attack on small business where they've backed off a bit. They, of course, too, like to look at big companies. It's easy, I guess, to wine and dine a major executive, but it's small business that generates most of the jobs in the country. Why can't they take a look at that?
Well, exactly. You know, I think that Morneau, one of his problems, as soon as that policy came out over the summer, it was evident that they were presenting it as a bunch of negatives. You know, even the finance department was saying, look, here's how we're going to punish you because you are hiding your money and you shouldn't be. Well, really what these companies are doing is making profits and either investing them into their growth or saving their capital for use down the road when they find that business opportunity they're ready to invest in. They've got the capital. They don't have to borrow it, so they can self-finance. I mean, that's a real plus of having money in the bank as a company because you've been profitable. And, you know, had the finance department come in and said, look, what we're going to do is create an incentive for you to use your retained earnings to invest in Canadian resource industries, and we'll even give you a tax credit if you do that. So we're going to make this a really sweet deal for you. I think this whole fiasco that they've gone through and arguably is still unfolding would not have happened. I think it was a classic marketing fail.
Do you think perhaps because Bill Morneau is such a huge millionaire, he has no idea how the average business works?
Well, I don't want to do the pile-on with Morneau. I think the poor guy, he maybe would be happier going back to playing squash at lunch downtown Toronto and having his getaway in the Bahamas or his villa in France or whatever, and just have that quiet, wealthy life because there's people out there, that's maybe what they're best at doing. And meanwhile, those of us who are out, you know, working hard for a living, who have to bring it every day, you know, leave us alone to do our work.
Stewart, anything else you wanted to add before we go today?
Well, I think, you know, we've been talking about Site C. That's a big decision. I do hope that as the whole set of facts settles down, people start to look at what the energy needs are over the long term, that we get to the right and proper decision. You know, in 10 years, we're going to need more electricity. Today, I was just looking at the news, there is now 20% of the Canadian population has come from abroad. We're bringing 300,000 new Canadians to the country every year through immigration. These people are going to be living places. They're going to be growing the population, having kids. When they do that, they'll be using more energy every day. It has to come from somewhere. And, you know, building Site C, things like that, they're tough to do. There's a lot of public opposition, but, you know, that's a project that is right for BC. And I do hope that we don't, you know, punish our children and grandchildren by failing to pursue the opportunity properly.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society, their website, resourceworks.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show or our guests can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.